free and appropriate public education. All of that's, any service has to be identified through the IEP team. A child has to be then diagnosed or determined which educational exceptionality, one of 14, that child has to then get special ed services. One of the 14 is ASD. Once the IEP team identifies that a child is or can qualify for services, then the team really starts to determine what the academic or functional goals are. But most teams will not touch on any methodology. And yes, the Office of Special Education will say that methodology has to be evidence-based. However, if we look at the majority of educational systems, very little is evidence-based. It really comes down to the individual practitioner, the individual instruction, or individual teacher, what curricula they're going to use or what interventions they're going to use. And a lot of times it's based on how that individual was trained, and we can get a way of, things that seem totally unevidence-based or they lack evidence, but still it's what's being used and can be argued as an appropriate educational intervention. Because that intervention simply has to benefit the child's ability to access the educational curriculum. Then it's deemed as appropriate. So then, the other thing is trying to figure out one other way that you can get in is for these services is if a child's behavior substantially impedes their learning or another child's learning, right? And then that's how they start to identify many of the kiddos qualifying for special ed services. Well, the medical side's really much different. And what I tried to do, because defining what is medically necessary really is hard. And it's hard for me because I've never, as a clinical psychologist, I have never questioned the services that I provide as being medically necessary. Well, neither have speech therapists, neither have OTs, neither have MDs. And in all honesty, until I was preparing for this presentation, it was the first time I have ever looked up the definition of medical necessity. Just because all of our training is around diagnosis, is around CPT codes and differentiate, all of that stuff that's right in the honey hole of medical necessity or medical services. So, all right, well now I've got and working with the behavior analysts here at Jumpstart, helping them understand what is medical necessity, how do we document it. And so what I basically tried to do is capture what both Medicaid and Medicare, they're the two federal governments or federal agencies that really define or set the standard for medical services and what will be reimbursed. And actually I need to move, let me move this real quick. There we go. And so basically Medicaid, and for a lot of us that's really what we're dealing with, is Medicaid is 0 to age 22 many times, so those are the individuals that we're serving. We really don't serve a lot of families in Medicare. But Medicaid really defines it as a medical service which is basically allows for rehabilitative services and other services. So rehabilitative many times is EPSTAT. And those are just the general diagnostic codes that Medicaid approved to be reimbursed, and services that families are entitled to through Medicaid. And other services such as home health care services, which is where ABA is going to fall, to help families and individuals attain or retain capability for independence or self-care, and that they're deemed are in the best interest of the recipient. Okay, there's some very specific things in that definition that are much more specific than kind of the educational piece, and I'll get at that here in a second. The one piece that I really want to pull from Medicare is, and I think this is a critical piece, is that Medicare actually talks about that the treatment, the prevention, the diagnosis, anything that we use has to be acceptable to medical standards. And so then we have to document that the services we're providing really do meet medical standards. Well, again, from those of us that provide ABA services, that's just a basic assumption, is that everything we're doing is evidence-based practice, and it's single subject design, and it's very effective. But really, what both of them are trying to get at is that medical necessity is deemed, services are deemed medically necessary, if I can talk, when a client is diagnosed with a condition that produces debilitating symptoms, side effects, and or functional impairments. So when you're thinking about documenting and justifying the service that you're requesting to a healthcare provider, that's the core piece right there that you have to get at. And, well, the problem is that most behavior analysts aren't trained in that piece, in the diagnosis of symptoms, in the identification of side effects, and or have understandings of functional impairments. But how do you document that so that an insurance company can understand what you're documenting? Because they aren't going to understand the VB-MAP, they aren't going to understand the ABLS, and that's not really documenting. Those are criterion reference that don't document functional impairment. So how do we go about doing that? And I'll talk a lot more about that in 2 weeks. There we go. So where does ABA fit in this medical necessity piece? Because there really is a lot of overlap between the educational and medical fields. So how does ABA fit in both? Because many times neither of them want ABA to be, educational people say, oh, well, that's a medical service. Education doesn't need to provide it. Medical field will say, oh, well, that's an educational service. Medicine's not responsible for it. Or even the behavioral health side isn't responsible for it. So, it comes down to medical folks will say, oh, well, as long as it isn't in the IEP, then we can address it. Well, it just isn't that easy, unfortunately. We really have to go above and beyond to document that the services that we are providing really address a debilitating disorder. I'm sorry, I'm having to move the video around. That way I can actually see the presentation. So one of the things I want to get at is what, kind of from a historical standpoint, why has ABA been denied? And it really gets at one of the core differences of how medicine has historically denied any kind of medical service and limited medical service. And that really comes back to the difference between a habilitative service and a rehabilitative service. So medicine has always said, or insurance companies have always said, that they will reimburse for any service that allows an individual to regain a skill they lost, right? So then for like OT, PT, speech, for an individual that has suffered a head injury, a TBI, a stroke, a spinal cord injury, they used to be walking, they used to be talking, all of a sudden this injury caused debilitating disorder, now they've lost it. Well, insurance companies see that as a critical component to helping an individual regain our skill. Well, that's rehabilitation. So insurance companies are not going to question that. However, historically, they have always denied anything that is viewed as habilitative. And so a habilitative service is any kind of service that's aimed at teaching a skill that has never been acquired to begin with. Well, you think about it, that's all of our individuals on the spectrum many times. That's anybody with an developmental delays or any kind of genetic disorders that, they just never acquire the skills due to the nature of the medical condition. Well, that's a problem for us because insurance companies are really going to see our service as our services provided to individuals with autism, regardless of ABA, speech, whatever it is, as a habilitative service. And we're already behind the 8 ball in trying to shift their thinking about the service that we provide. And this really is a critical thing in understanding insurance companies' assumptions when trying to get a service approved, right? We have to know that they're going to think that what we're doing is habilitative in nature. So we kind of have to start packaging it in a way that might be viewed more as rehabilitative, not so much as habilitative. Now, there's just some slight tweaks that we can do that will allow us for that, or allow that to happen. Was there a question, or was that just feedback? Question? Okay. Or just feedback. So again, from a rehab standpoint, as long as we can identify symptoms, that symptoms are severe, that there's any kind of loss of skill, or that there's an impairment in functioning, then we can really make the argument that the services we're providing are habilitative in nature. Okay? So those are going to be some of the key pieces that we're going to really want to target in our documentation, regardless of background, ABA or speech OT. Give me a second here. There we go. So again, understanding why or how medical services have typically been denied or limited, it is just important to know when you're fighting this battle, because it's typical roadblocks that still, even with insurance mandates, come up. We actually just had a kiddo where we had a prior authorization to provide ABA services. We started billing for it, and the EOB explanation of benefit comes back as all services denied because services are deemed educational in nature. And this was in New Mexico, where there's an insurance mandate, and we had a prior auth to provide the CPT codes, and it was denied. So there's still the assumption there, right? You just have to know it. Well, now we have to start fighting it on a billing side. But one of the ways, again, the insurance companies are trying to limit cost while maximizing benefit to the client. Well, one way they do that is they limit a member's access to providers by limiting the number of in-network providers. So anytime, and we just opened our center here in Denver, and it's taken us about a year to become in-network providers for insurance companies that we provide service to in New Mexico. We're already in-network, and it's still taking us about 8 months to become in-network providers in Colorado. And it's just a way that they limit services, that they exclude anything that's deemed experimental. And for years, ABA has been deemed experimental. But what's interesting about this, and I just find this stuff fascinating, is ABA, given the 20, 30 years of empirical evidence, is deemed experimental, but Sensory, again, doesn't have the background that ABA does, and it's never questioned. And the sensory interventions, and to me, it's mind-boggling how one service can be denied for the same population, trying to maybe not address similar things, but it just with a different diagnosis, the service is accepted. And it just is mind-boggling to me. They also limit through prior authorizations if they ever see, again, like the example I said, that a service is deemed educational, and many ABA services are going to be deemed educational initially. And then again, if it's ever viewed as habilitative. But those are going to be the two big obstacles that we have to overcome, is the nature of ABA being habilitative, or a history of it being viewed as habilitative, and educational. We just constantly have to battle that. Well, one of the things that, again, I've never questioned ABA as being, again, if you recall kind of the Medicaid definition talking about medical standard, right? That the service you provide has to be to the medical standard. Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2007 came out with this statement, which again adds validity to our assumption that medical services, or ABA, is truly a medically based service to the standard for which we would expect for any medical service. So from my perspective, we can make that argument very easily. But the problem is that, again, many insurances will say it's experimental. Well, here's where we have to start addressing some of our general assumptions. And here I'm going to kind of start talking a little more about ABA specifically, because there's some assumptions about ABA, and I think that many times with many behavior analysts getting training in the educational departments, much of this isn't even addressed. And so when we start talking about ABA addressing, I'm blanking on it. That it's very objective in nature, that we don't view behavior as a construct, all of that stuff. Well, you know what? That's different than the general medical field, and we have to know that the medical field loves its constructs, and if you can't conceptualize behavior to address specific constructs, it's going to be very hard to say a service is medically necessary. Well, why is that? Well, the DSM-5, which is developed by psychiatry, basically is an attempt to categorize behaviors in clusters to then give a diagnosis. Well, the DSM-5 is a little bit better about utilizing research to kind of group these groups together, but it still is a categorization and just a basic construct of behaviors and understanding those. And so as we start to understand that basically behavior analysts have to get at behavioral constructs to deem medical necessity, then it gets a little bit easier. But we have to leave the comfort zone, and we have to deal with some nebulous kind of diagnoses that seem just a little bit harder to kind of grasp onto. And I think that's one reason that the medical field, we're so involved in data. Many medical providers are kind of like, oh my gosh, there's too much data here. What do you want me to look at? And there's just that difference between behavior analysis and the medical field. And so that's one of the things we'll have to get at and be able to better define. So in an attempt to better kind of redefine ABA, here's two simple sentences that I tried to give an example of what we can do. So ABA is a natural science that applies the scientific methodology to address socially meaningful behavior, and that's kind of a typical definition. Well, but if we now insert socially meaningful, debilitating behaviors that have side effects and or functional impairments, okay, now we're right addressing medical services, right? And it's just adding those little phrases to our understanding of what ABA addresses. It's not a huge shift, but it gets right at being able to diagnose that medical necessity. And then again, we see behavior as the function of behavior, that it isn't necessarily any kind of hypothetical entities created by the mind, will, or self. All right, that's typically different than both the educational field and the medical field, and we just have to know that. And we have to be willing to kind of play the game to get this done. And I think that what's been nice in trying to play this game, that we do have to understand that there's a lot of medical constructs out there, is that the medical mandates that are coming out, the insurance mandates, are actually making this argument a little bit easier, and it isn't as difficult as it once used to be. And so the mandates are shifting the ground so that we don't have to necessarily make a huge shift to kind of bridge that gap between medicine and ABA, but we still have to build a little bit of a bridge. And so then what really do we have to do to start building that bridge from kind of to better understand these constructs, to show that our service really is medically necessary? And so these are really kind of the 4 bullet points that I'm going to close on. I think I got to look at my presentation. I think I'm towards my last slide. And excuse me, this is the first time I presented this one to an outside group. It is, okay. We've talked about it a whole bunch in our clinic meetings, but kind of putting it together for a general group to try to summarize everything is just hard, as opposed to having a general discussion and kind of addressing questions as we go. So, so basically here are the 4 take-home points that will then take a leap into next time to really be specific about this. So kind of moving forward, as long as if you can document a medical condition then we should be good, right? Well, in many ways, but many insurances are starting to make it a little more difficult than ASD is, just saying autism spectrum disorder, the child has autism spectrum disorder diagnosed by such and such, and it's a medical condition. Well, all right, but what's the severity of it? And we have to start really getting at severity of medical symptoms. So just saying that the symptom exists or that the disorder exists isn't any longer acceptable. That's where insurances are going to start limiting, is that yes, they have autism, but really it's just autism. It's really not that debilitating. And so we have to start being very diligent about documenting that the debilitative nature of the disorder or the functional impairment, right? We have to get at those key points right there. We then also have to document that to show that our services aren't educationally based, that there's no duplication in the IEP. So you'll see this in TRICARE. TRICARE mandates an IEP, that they see the IEP. So that's the piece that TRICARE is trying to say, no, there is, and there really is an educational part to the service of children with autism. Historically, education has been the de facto treatment. Education, speech, OT has been the de facto treatment of children with autism. However, that's really shifting, and the standard that medicine puts on ABA really many times makes the service, the medical service of ABA through behavioral health providers, not always, but many times a much higher quality of service than many educational services can be provided. And then, we really have to, and this starts getting hard, is how do we document that the ABA service is going to deliver improved functioning over and above what simple growth or maturation would do. And so there we have to start looking at some standardized assessments and some different things like that to be able to show change. And then finally, really addressing core symptoms and potential other medical conditions. And I'll talk extensively in 2 weeks about this piece to then, all right, how do we address both core symptoms but document the other medical conditions that touch on the severity of the disorder and the functional impairment. And so I hope today I really was able to help you guys understand kind of where we've been, kind of my experience. I didn't really get into a lot of my experience over the past 20 years in the field of autism. I think one of the interesting pieces that I've just come to experience is years and years ago I thought, oh, I should get a BCBA. And I'm like, I'm a psychologist. I don't need a BCBA. I'll never, I'm fine. And, now with insurance and the insurance mandates, they're making, behavioral health providers cannot provide the ABA service. So I'm going to finally have to sit down and take the test, even though I don't want to take the test, because as a clinical psychologist, many insurances will not let me supervise ABA programs. You're going to have to be behavior analysts. So now we have these two merging fields, and this is another way insurance is going to limit it. We have behavior analysts that are predominantly trained in the educational field, separated from the diagnostic process of determining medical necessity. And so you're going to have to bring those two together to be able to show medical necessity. Well, it's going to take a lot of collaboration between the behavioral health providers and the ABA providers to get the ABA providers the information they need to then document that. And I'll go over extensively kind of how Jumpstart's going about doing that and some of the steps that we've put into place to do that. Let's see. And so this is just kind of going over some of the core ways that we document some of that, but I'll really get into much greater detail next time. So let me stop there. Are there questions? And I ran through that very quickly, and I don't even know if I was under 20 minutes, but probably not, because I talk a lot.
That was wonderful. Does anybody have any questions?
And I really
that comprehensive.
Yeah, I think part of it is, and for me, it really is hard to get at, and I know that today didn't fully answer your questions on how to do that. I get that. But without understanding some of the general assumptions and some of the background, everything that I talk about next or in 2 weeks from now will be, it would be like giving you a template without understanding why it's important. And what's going to start happening is they're going to go less off of report. Insurance companies are going to go less off of a report that you send in, and you're going to have to verbally argue for medical necessity. And if you don't know what the other side of the phone, what assumptions they have, it's just going to be hard. And you aren't going to be able to get the kids the services that they need. So I get it doesn't fully address the exact pieces that you guys were hoping to. I know that this is really what you guys wanted me to get at. I'll get at that next week and really help you understand how many of core symptoms do you have to have before, in your treatment plan so that an insurance company actually sees it as medically necessary. What other things do you have to put in?
I don't have any questions. This is a great topic, and I'm going to unfortunately miss next week because I'll be in a U-Haul driving to New Mexico to move.
Oh, great.
But I do have here with Blue Cross what they've, in Louisiana, we have to go through new directions now. And I'll be glad to share several forms. It makes us do this. We have to have detailed discharge criteria, how every single goal ties into one of the core deficits. I can black out names and share some of those the ones that were very successful and went through the process and got approved pretty easy. But with every one of them, I've had to call. They've made me argue over the phone for the services.
Yep. And here at Jumpstart, we've even changed our goals to tying to specific diagnostic codes. So
that's what we do to each one.
Mm-hmm. So not only for autism, but then for sleep disorders, for feeding disorders, for everything. We tie those to specific ICD-10 codes. That way the insurance company sees that our goals are not only addressing the ASD symptoms, but they're going above and beyond and addressing other well-established medical conditions. And we've been really successful with that. And it's, just know that you're on shifting ground, and, reports are going to have to change as insurance kind of find new ways to limit access, unfortunately.
Well, I think that this is great that you're going to be coming back next week or next clinic, because that will entice everybody to join us in 2 weeks. And if you are not able to attend, though, we do have everything that is getting uploaded to our website, and you'll be able to access the information there. Brian, you had mentioned that you would be comfortable with sharing the PowerPoints, and would that be possible for us to share that on our website as well?
Absolutely. I'll email it over to you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I think that this is a great conversation, and as Dr. Lopez was mentioning, this is a conversation that many of us are starting to have, and it's documenting it within our treatment plans, but then also having that basic understanding so we can have those conversations and understand the perspective that the care coordinators or the insurance companies might be coming from, and then helping be able to communicate effectively with one another so that we can be able to help establish access to the intensity that we're recommending as well. And so I think that this is a great way to begin that conversation and help us be able to communicate effectively as well, because I know that many of us have gone into those conversations and not known how to approach them and what's the best way to effectively communicate why we're asking for what we're asking for and why it's important as well. So Vanessa, I will go ahead and unmute you.
All right. Hi. Okay. Is this we're all good with everyone can see this?
Yes, it's perfect.
All right. So this is a case presentation about some challenging behaviors. We have a 6.5-year-old male who's been in treatment for about 2.5 years. He's in a general ed kindergarten classroom right now with one-on-one support through our agency. So basically the behaviors that we have seen since the start of treatment are verbal protest, tantrum, aggression, self-injury, and some dropping to the floor or running away in response to pretty negative stimuli, but also just things that just commonly occur throughout his day. So someone using the word not, losing a game, making a mistake on a worksheet, people who speak too quickly near him, peers looking at him the wrong way, just basically anything he perceives as negative, even if it's positive. So, so like, oh no, that's not chocolate ice cream, that's strawberry ice cream. If you said not, then he may have a full meltdown. So the primary goals of care have been, the parents want to increase his flexibility so that he can kind of, switch from situation to situation in the home without worrying he might have a meltdown, increase his social skills and social understanding. They talk a lot about cognitive processing time, so his ability to kind of understand verbal input and then process it and have a response that makes sense. Let's see. And then obviously reduce his maladaptive behaviors across settings. So I've consulted with a lot of colleagues and currently his professionals in his school setting. He did have a full FBA run in 2014 when he was in preschool. And we've done some assessments here as well. So we've done the ABAS-2 and the BRIEF, which assesses for executive functioning deficits. So we can go to the next page. Thank you. So some of our main treatment objectives, obviously behavior reduction, and then some of those replacement behaviors, requesting for help and cessation, tolerating winning and losing, understanding the rules of a game, that kind of thing, flexibility, tolerating undesired outcomes, tolerating undesired words or activities. We have done some self-help skills for him, dressing and undressing independently. He's pretty independent and high functioning, but for whatever reason, self-help's been a challenge for him. We are working on perspective taking. Right now he's in sensory perspective taking, so just kind of understanding what he senses and what other people sense and how that's different and why. But in the future, we hope to move on to, more complex knowing, thinking, deception, that kind of thing. We're working on executive functioning, working memory and problem solving, and social problem solving. He has a diagnosis of autism. Just a side note, the parents don't believe he actually has autism, but they did get him a diagnosis so that he could access services. He's not on any medications. He is on a restrictive diet and takes some vitamins and supplements. A couple years ago, he started taking kind of some strict regimens of vitamins, and we did actually see a very correlational improvement when he started some of them, but it didn't sustain, the improvement didn't sustain through the duration of use of the supplements. So it might have just been whatever intervention at the time was happening. Right now he gets speech, OT, ABA at school for the full school day, and ABA at home 1 to 3 times per week for 2.5 hours each time. And he was seeing a private speech therapist who's a very good clinician. It's on hold right now, but the parents are looking to resume it 60 minutes a week. He has one sister. His parents are married and they live at home together. And then some barriers to treatment. There aren't a ton, but right now the school environment is not therapeutically beneficial because the teacher will not follow the intervention plan. And then there is some concern with the limited home treatment. They have a busy schedule. They have another child who is involved in a lot of, after school activities. So, 1 to 3 times a week for 2.5 hours to me seems a little bit limited. So I think that's the end of that form. Oh, no, it's not. Okay, so he's a vocal communicator. He communicates in full sentences. He does have some challenges in expressing some social concepts, and some of his conversational skills are repetitive or limited. He doesn't have any issues with communicating most of his needs except for these last 3. Sometimes, instead of asking to just be done with whatever's happening, he'll have a tantrum instead. Same with asking for help. If he makes a mistake, he'll get frustrated with himself but not ask for help from an adult. So that's that. I think we can move on to the next form. Okay, so these are some of the behaviors that we do see. Most of the time, the vocal protest is in the form of grunting and then followed by negative vocalizations such as "everyone hates me," or he's even been known to say, "I'm such a monster." So why do I always do bad things? And just kind of screaming about how he's feeling at the moment. We see some physical non-compliance in the form of running away or dropping to the floor, which is often then followed by a tantrum. Self-injury, he hits himself in the head. Sometimes he pulls his own hair. And often he'll injure himself in the midst of a tantrum by accidentally, thrashing an arm and hitting something nearby. And then sometimes we do see aggression, so successfully or attempting to kick, hit, bite, slap, or scratch another person. These are the behavior rates at school, and I think we'll see it more when we go into the graphs. So if you have any questions about specific numbers, just let me know. And I would say the current intensity continues to be moderate to intense, even though you may see in the graph some improvement. It's still, when he does have a tantrum or engages in screaming, it's extremely intense and disruptive across settings. Okay, so what's happening is these behaviors are requiring a pretty intensive level of intervention, especially, yeah, there we go. So, the parents are needing to intervene really frequently. The intervention's pretty extensive. Same with the interventionists at school, and the teacher doesn't like us to really do anything, so the extensive time that it takes to kind of deal with a behavior is certainly impacting his participation in the home and community setting and in the school as well. Obviously there's a safety risk if he's throwing himself around during a tantrum. And also, I didn't list it here, but the peers see him doing this at school, and that can impact him negatively as well. So I hypothesize that the function of these behaviors, I don't know if it's one or all three of these kind of general categories, but basically it's access to control. So whether that's a social positive or social negative function, it kind of is both. Basically, he is accessing control of his environment. Don't say that, say this. Don't do this, do that. And then to some degree, there might be some automatic reinforcement in there in terms of escaping aversive feelings and that kind of thing. Okay, so we can move on to the next page. So he did have an FBA in preschool, and that FBA actually indicated that the behaviors that we are seeing were functioning to access attention and tangibles, and sometimes to escape from demands. I don't agree 100% with the results of this FBA. He was obviously accessing a consequence from his BIIs each time the behavior occurred, so attention was marked, but we've historically never seen a reduction in behaviors when we do something like attention extinction or anything like that. And really it's pretty aversive to him to have us attend to him in response to any of his behaviors. So, but that was the result in preschool, and there certainly could be secondary functions in terms of attention and all of that. Okay, so our intervention plan, and basically what I'm seeking from the group is any additional ideas on replacement behaviors, how to teach replacement behaviors, and intervention strategies to reduce behaviors, because what we see over time is a big fluctuation. So he's certainly decreasing some of his behaviors over time, but it's historically always gone up and down, up and down, up and down in response to new interventions. And each intervention we put in place seems to be super effective for a few months, and then he starts creeping his rates back up, which makes sense. Reinforcement is kind of accessed frequently over a period of time, and then he becomes satiated and it's not as fun anymore, and so his behaviors start creeping up again. But that's kind of the issue I run into with him. So currently our antecedent procedures, we're working on functional communication training, manning for help, cessation, priming for social skills and social comprehension. We do some task interspersal when we can at home. At school, we're not able to manipulate any of the presentation of the materials. Just the teacher is kind of blocking access to being able to do that. But at home, we use task interspersal, especially when we're teaching, winning and losing. We wouldn't do 3 win and lose games in a row or anything like that. He does get non-contingent access to breaks and calming strategies every 20 to 30 minutes across settings, and we have a list of all the things that seem to bring him down when he's starting to demonstrate some precursor behaviors. We have priming prior to transitions and common behavior antecedents. So, there's a certain type of classwork that can be very, he makes a lot of mistakes. Okay, sorry, a few more minutes. And then we have some social stories and textual cues and, lots and lots of access to appropriate control, choices throughout the day, excessive amounts of choices that he's given. And these are the replacement behaviors. I already went over those. So we can scroll down. Okay, so these are some of the graphs for his replacement behaviors. So manning for help and cessation, the green is help and the blue is cessation. You can kind of see this was up through 11/2015 is when I had the most current data for this presentation. You can see a lot of progress over time, but we would want to see by now, over, almost, I guess 2 years since we started this, we would have wanted to see a little bit higher rates, especially manning for cessation. We're working on right now just identifying replacements when losing or winning. So basically, identifying sportsman-like behavior, good job, amen, or whatever he might be able to say in response to winning or losing. The next one. This is his percentage of sportsman-like behavior at school. So, tolerating rule changes or unexpected outcomes during competitive events. You can see some improvement over time. This is just for this school year. And then his flexibility rate. So this is remaining calm in response to common antecedents such as adult redirections or corrections. So you can see a little bit of a dip most recently in his ability to tolerate adult redirections. And then at home we have a DRO where we are teaching him, taking turns. So it's my time, now it's your time. During my time, you can't tell me what to do. During your time, I can't tell you what to do. So we're just kind of desensitizing him through a DRO to being flexible. And we've gotten him up to 8 minutes on our time where we are the boss type of thing. So that's made some progress. Scroll down. Okay, so the interventions. At home, the parents are super on board. They're really good with implementing this. And I would like some feedback. So we have this control extinction procedure. It's mostly for words that we say. So contingent on screaming, don't say don't, or whatever he might scream at us. We would say, I'm going to say don't again. I'm going to repeat it. And if you can remain calm, we can move on. And then we would say, okay, don't. And then we repeat that process until calm behavior is observed. I'm not sure if that's functioning as extinction of his control of our words or a punishment, so something to think about. And then we have a DRA, so we have a cool as a cucumber social story and little cucumber tokens that he fills a jar anytime he responds flexibly. And then, like I said, we're working on that DRO. And then at school, we also have the control extinction procedure. We're not really able to implement it inside the classroom, but at recess we can implement it. And then the DRA, and just in terms of, verbal thumbs up when he's doing a good job, and we would use the extinction procedure when he is not responding flexibly. And we also have a DRL in place, and I worked together with the teacher to create this, and she really likes this. So, he has a certain number of behaviors he's kind of allowed to have during each part of the day, and then if he has that or less, he earns a little smiley stamp from the teacher, and then if he has at least 4 stamps, he can get a little smiley faced sticker to send home and put on his calendar, and he collects them and exchanges them for a treasure box or outings with his family. And then what I've observed the teacher to do in addition that's not in the intervention plan is negotiate with him, talk through all the behaviors as they're ongoing. So he's in the middle of a tantrum and she's trying to prompt him to say how he's feeling. She's had him stand in front of the classmates during a tantrum so he could tell everyone how he's feeling. And she often tells him he's a good boy and that she forgives him every time that he screams. So those are some of the barriers that we're seeing in terms of the teacher. And then just scroll down, I have some graphs. So here's school protests, not a ton of progress. It's kind of fluctuating up and down. The rate of tantrums has reduced significantly. However, he is in a general ed classroom now, so we don't want to see any tantrums at this point. So it's still an issue and inhibiting his participation. Scroll down. Duration has gone really well. The duration of tantrums is reducing significantly, both over time and in this school year. So that's good. So we can scroll down. And then this is for home. Also some good progress with duration of tantrums and rate of tantrum and protest at home. But you can kind of see ever since that initial dip, it's still kind of sustaining around the same rates. So, still a concern in the home setting. And then I think there might be one more page. And this is self-injury. This was a big one for us, obviously, and we're seeing some rise in it again at school and at home. So that's a concern right now. I think that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was excellent, very comprehensive, and I appreciate you going through all of the details of the case. So just to summarize briefly, we have a 6-year-old boy diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder that's been receiving ABA treatment for the past 2.5 years. He's receiving one-on-one support in the school setting as well as support one-on-one in the home for approximately 1 to 3 days per week. Throughout the course of treatment, there have been several behaviors of concern that have been targeted. We've seen some great progress across some of these areas and some fluctuations in some other behaviors of concern. The primary reason why you are here today is to seek some consultation and troubleshooting from the team regarding the fluctuations that you've been observing in his behaviors of concern. Most notably that an intervention will result in an immediate improvement in some of those behaviors, but then you'll often see that it then reemerges or increases again over time. And you've been seeing that persist across the past 2.5 years. There's also some treatment barriers that you had also mentioned as well related to consistency and fidelity of treatment implementation, and are probably seeking some consultation on those areas too. Does that sound like an overall good summary of the case?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So for those of you that are new to Echo Autism, the overarching goal of Echo Autism is to help identify and address the treatment barriers through care coordination. So when we have our behavior analysts that are working within these complex cases and communities, there are quite often different barriers or environmental variables that we need to take into consideration. And so what we'd like to do is open up the questions for first our participants in the audience and focus on those questions that might be really related to identifying and addressing those treatment barriers through care coordination. And then we're going to circle back and do audience questions. We'll do the panel questions as well. And then we'll do questions related to the behaviors of concern, secondary. Then at the end, we will move on to the recommendations and spend the bulk of the time with some recommendations for Vanessa, and then we'll submit everything in written form to everybody that is attending today. So first, we will go ahead and open up. We have about, I would say maybe 7 minutes for audience questions. So what we can do is you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask Vanessa any clarifying questions that you might have about her case.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi.
This is Sarah in Wisconsin. You did a fantastic job, and you guys have been doing a ton of work. I am just blown away by all the stuff you guys are already doing. My questions were just about how are you guys going about targeting and acquiring flexibility, and how is it defined to him so he understands what that word means?
That's a really good question, and we have a number of things in place that are targeting that. So one is we have just a program where we are selecting specific targets to work on. So, you know, we've worked on the words try again and the word no, and where we're just presenting it throughout our home sessions and presenting him with a cool as a cucumber token if he doesn't have a negative reaction. So that's done kind of throughout the session. And with priming, you know, initially when we start, I'm going to say no, and if you stay calm, we're going to put a cucumber token in. Remember what you get for all your cucumber tokens, and we read the social. We have a social story about, you know, defining, you know, sometimes my friends, you know, say no, but they still like me. I'm still a good kid, and, you know, kind of explaining all those social norms and contingencies in the social story. And when I stay cool as a cucumber, I can, you know, makes my friends happy. And then we have the DRO at home as well, where we have a visual out, and you know, now it's your turn to be in control.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and he gets to, we kind of taught him to be, you know, the boss. So we can play however you want. It's your turn. Okay, now it's my turn. And I'm going to follow through if you don't listen. And so it's kind of like, you know, I'm the boss now. And if he tries to resist any sort of, you know, sometimes he'll be inflexible about how we're playing or something like that. So if he tries to resist any of that kind of stuff, then we'll be like, oh, remember, you know, it's my turn. What does that mean? And he has responded really, really positively to that. I'm just, at some point that has to be turned into something natural, to you know, what your life looks like, which is back and forth sharing of control.
Yeah, that is the challenge. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask next, is how you guys are cueing him into who's in control. Like if there's like a bracelet that's worn or a name tag or anything that shows, just as a reminder to him in the environment that now
right now it's just a little card that says, you know, your time and teacher, you know, my time and your time type of thing. And one side's red and one side's green. And so he's been taught what each one means. And
okay, cool. Got you. I just have one more, if it's all right.
Uh-huh.
I'm fascinated by this case. I think it's going to be awesome to see what the solutions are. I don't have any, so I'm just asking. I wondered if he is able to rate his triggers as far as which ones are stress evoking, which ones are not, specific words that are no big deal, but ones that are a big problem, like if he's gone through anything like that with you guys.
You know, that's a really great idea. We haven't done that formally. He is able to. I've seen him, you know, he'll say, you know, oh, you're the toughest teacher. You're not as tough as that other teacher, or, you know, I just makes me feel really frustrated or really confused when I hear this word. Like he can certainly express all of those. We haven't actually gone through with him because I imagine it might elicit a huge tantrum
Yes.
to sit there and list out all the things he hates. But that's
Maybe if
really
you're
good-
like textual, he just reads them. No one has to verbalize it. But
Mhm.
yeah,
that's
that
a
was
good
just,
idea.
I think that's all
Great.
the questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sarah. We've gone through the full 10 seconds. So we'll go ahead and move on to our panelists. And Dr. Stoll, since you are joining us today, would you like to start?
Sure, I'd love to. Vanessa, awesome job. Really fantastic. I learned a lot. So being a pediatrician and not a board certified behavior analyst, I don't know all the lingo, so I feel like I always get to learn something too. I had a couple of questions. Can you clarify for me on how this, I saw in the beginning that one of this child's issues is around sleep. Can you provide some additional details or clarify for me what that is looking like?
Issues with, did you say sleep?
Sleep, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think he has any issues with sleep.
Okay. Oh, I think I know. So, Joy, is on this, are those the list of things that they can pick from?
Yes. Yeah, I bolded, sorry, I bolded.
Okay, no problem. I was thinking that was his list. Okay, gotcha. Okay, excellent. So,
Sleep's good.
okay, hey, that's great. So what about his focus and attention? It sounds like he's kind of, from my perspective, I would maybe interpret him as all over the map, but I'm curious if his parents feel that way or if his teachers have talked about his focus and attention, things like that.
So that's a really good question. He has deficits in his executive functioning. He really does. And so task initiation is a challenge for him.
Okay.
So that's where I see a lot of the focus issues. He can't start. He can't focus enough to start a task. But what's interesting is when it's a group situation, he's able to focus as long as his peers. So if it's a group activity where he's required to look at the teacher and listen and participate just like his peers, he didn't used to be able to do this, but we've gotten him to the point where that's no longer an issue. But it's with the individual tasks that focus is really off, and he does a lot of off-task, talking like, oh, but, I don't know how to draw this, or, just kind of seeking attention instead of just working.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the only questions I have for right now.
Okay, perfect. And then Sarah, did you want to go next? I know that you mentioned you were having some connectivity issues. We cannot hear you, but let me see. Okay. Will you try talking again?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry about that. So I also was curious about the sleep, and I mean, is that actually stated that he's a good sleeper? Have the parents even really kind of paid attention to that? Because I know personally, until I read an article about the behaviors that were happening in school with my son, I didn't even think about the sleep patterns that he was having, and then I started noticing, okay, if I put him to bed and he's asleep by 8:30, he has a much better day the next day. But then it wasn't really I didn't really think he had sleep issues. So I'm just curious as to if they've even thought about that. I mean, and the other thing is that when you were talking about this, I'm like, wow, this is my child. I mean, they have a lot, they have a lot of similarities in their behaviors and in school as well. And so that's why I was curious about the sleep.
Good question. So I have checked in with them on several occasions about sleep, and they've never had any concerns. But I suppose it might be useful to have them start maybe taking a journal of when he falls asleep, and then maybe we can compare it to the behaviors the following day at school. That might be a useful bit of information.
Okay, yeah. And then how does he, I'm sure he responds really well to positive praise. Does the teacher do a lot of that in school, or is it kind of just hit or miss? Or
So curiously, this kiddo does not like most types of praise. So he does okay if it's like a fist bump or a thumbs up, but if it's anything more than that, he will grunt or scream. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to keep saying good job until you can not grunt or scream. But the teacher does does a lot of descriptive praise, which he does well with. So I see that you're, working really hard, or, I forgive you, you're a good boy, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But not a ton of, overly enthusiastic praise, which I don't think would go over well with him anyway.
All right. Okay. And then one last question. His parents' involvement in the school, is it with him, at the school? How is that?
So mom's actually extremely involved. She's, I don't know if it's PTA or what she does, but she helps with library and helps set up events and is in the classroom once a week. So she's extremely involved. And this teacher actually had his sister when she was in kindergarten. So they have a long history. So she's around all the time.
Okay, now you could stop, because that's like freaking me out even more. It's even more like my story, Interesting. Okay, well, I guess that's all I have. Thank you, Vanessa, and great work with all your thinking and how you're helping him. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Zoe, would you like to go next?
I never know if I'm supposed to unmute myself or if you guys just do it automatically. I guess we'll do it on both. Again, I'm Zoe Miguel. I'm a licensed clinical social worker located here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I just second the admiration for the amount of work that you have done, an incredible amount. So this boy is obviously very lucky to have such a team. I have a couple of clarifying questions. So one is sort of going to what Sarah was touching on, was this idea of, it sounds like he has a lot of negative self-talk. I can't do it. I'm a monster. I don't do a good job. And that's always very concerning to me. And so I wondered if there were other things, so maybe not, we want to make sure that whatever praise is given is reinforcing, right? So if we get into things like, good job, and he freaks out, and then you're saying good job, obviously that's aversive, right? So that's not praise to him. But I wondered if there were things that you had implemented that were reinforcing, like what do his reinforcers look like?
So he loves earning like the happy faces. And he gets that, we print them out, and they're just little like paper cutouts, and each one is different. And he'll ask his mom, like during the holidays, he was like, can I have an elf happy face and a Santa one? And, he really likes all the little things that he earns. And, right now he is, with his happy faces, he's getting outings with dad, which is super, super exciting for him. So that, and then just quite honestly, like the absence of anyone telling him what to do or how to do things or correcting him is extremely reinforcing for him. So that, my time, your time, when it's his time, it's really, really, really reinforcing. And we don't get to his time until we've completed my time, like the entire duration of my time, without any instances of behavior. So, the time is restarted. So that reinforcement is in place. I've probed through some self-esteem questions. So, what do you think you're good at? What do you think is hard for you? What is your sister good at? And he can answer all those questions, and he does know what he's good at. So does that answer your question?
Yes, great, thank you. I was wondering, in terms of the parent piece, so if they don't think it's autism, if they are not in agreement with the diagnosis, how do they explain some of his challenges and why he's having a hard time?
I don't think they know how to explain it. They think he has processing issues and anger issues. I think for a while they were thinking it was like a vitamin deficiency, or they were trying to seek out some medical reasonings, excessive mercury in his system and that kind of stuff. But I don't think they don't know what they think it is. Yeah.
Let's see. And sorry. You noted that the environment was not therapeutically beneficial, and I was curious what environment, and then what were the thoughts around it not being, or some of the challenges?
Mhm. One of our biggest challenges this year has been the school setting and his teacher. So she is extremely proud of her teaching abilities. She's a great teacher, but has very mentalistic view of teaching children and kind of almost runs therapy sessions with them. And so a lot of it is going exact opposite of our interventions. And we've had several meetings and she will not. And, you know, I've spoken with the school staff and with the administration and tried to kind of figure out how we can better work together. And it's been quite a challenge. She does not really want us there. So it's been hard.
That's really tough. That's really tough. And that actually leads nicely into my last question, which is, in his IEP, are the intervention strategies very explicit in terms of what accommodations are being used, what supports are being used, what type of discipline is being used?
So he had his FBA in preschool, and that was done by a district BCBA. And it was really well done, even though I don't necessarily agree with the function. So that FBA is part of his IEP's current IEP at least. And
was it BPI created from that FBA?
yes.
BIP, sorry.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Okay.
But it doesn't outline all of the specific things we had to put in place
Okay.
since he started.
Are some of those, is the teacher able to implement any of those? Do you agree with the interventions?
No, she's participatory in our little stamp chart that we have, the DRL, but any sort of reactive strategies she doesn't implement.
Well, thank you so much.
Perfect. All right, and Tina.
Hi, everybody. So Vanessa, I concur. I think you've done a great job with the case so far, and it is a complex case. I have a slew of questions. I'm going to try to pick and choose the biggest ones. I'm glad Zoe asked about, what else might be going on for this kiddo, because I sort of had the same reaction when you talked about sort of some of the self-deprecating comments he was making. And as you know, with our kiddos with autism, they often go on to develop comorbid conditions, including anxiety and depression, and some of those signs and symptoms start to appear around this age. And so I'm glad that you're taking a close look at some of that and looking at sort of self-esteem related issues. And so I think even if he's not there yet, continuing to think about that as a focus, I think is spot on. So I just love to hear that.
Okay.
You mentioned that this kid seems like a little bit of a smarty. He's got some really nice language skills and some really great areas of strength. Do you have a general sense from the initial diagnostic report what his level of intellectual functioning is, or school evals?
Mm-hmm. There was no concern with that at any of his evaluations.
Okay. So average intellectual functioning. Okay, great to know. And then I'm just trying to wrap my head around the services in school, services in home. So you are providing direct intervention services only in the home-based context. Is that right?
No, home and school.
Home and school. And in what capacity are you working in the school? Is that through a contract with the school, or through funding from the family that is just allowing you to go into the school in an informal capacity? What's the formality of the relationship?
It's formal, so it's a district contract.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I asked that question because I think it lets us know maybe how you can maneuver to facilitate increased collaboration with the school, right? If you're sort of a guest in their house, so to speak, it makes it harder to get them on board. If you have that established contractual relationship with the school, if they've invited you to be there, they want you there, right? Or so says the contract. Then how can we kind of push that a little bit and make that a more collaborative relationship? That's good to know.
Yeah.
I think sort of the biggest question I have is really about the functions of his problem behavior, right? And I know that you said he had this preschool FBA. It was well done. You don't sort of agree with the functions. I'm wondering if you can just recap for me, Do you think that all of the topographies of his problem behavior exist in the same response class? And what do you really think the controlling functions are, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so all the topographies are happening in response to this similar antecedents. So it's all, you know, any one of those behaviors could happen in response to any one of the antecedents. Aggression generally won't happen until an adult is like intervening, because if adult's not intervening, he's already, like, he doesn't need to rise to that level type of a thing. Yeah, so they all happen for similar reasons. I can't explain it any other way other than if I scream at you, you won't say not again. Or if I have a tantrum, you know, my peer won't look at me like that again, or that's the only way I can explain it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to try to phrase a question where I don't get in trouble and slip into recommendation mode, because I know we're supposed to hold our recs. You know, I think that there's, somebody's laughing at me, it's probably Joy. I think that there's something about the conceptualization of the problem behavior as control that may be restricting your ability to sort of see the refined intervention techniques that you really need to put into place to get at what's really functioning to control the problem behavior. So I guess my question would be, do you feel good about the conceptualization of control as a function? Meaning, would it serve you better to think about perhaps escape or attention being the function, right? So, and, you know, I think sometimes we may slip into thinking or using control maybe because we haven't considered the effect of the MO and how motivational factors influence the reinforcing properties of what you think is reinforcing in the moment. And thinking through the MO piece would reframe the conceptualization of what's really functioning to control the problem behavior. So I don't know exactly what my question is, other than, do you feel good about that conceptualization? Because it's a bit of a departure in our field, right, to talk about control in that way. Yeah. Have you thought that through?
Yeah. So I've thought a lot of, I've spoken to my colleagues extensively on this issue, and you know, what is control exactly? What am I saying when I say control? What function is that? You know, I think it's both. I think it's escape from, you know, negative associations, or escape from a social situation which he perceives as aversive. But it could also be conceptualized as, you know, access to, you know, changing another person's behavior, or access to, you know, a peer then playing a game by his rules if he has a tantrum, because peers may then, like, if he starts screaming, they may then, okay, we'll play it your way. So it's both escape and access. In that sense, if we just want to say, you know, one of the classic core functions, but you know, the combination of those two, and when it's to do with other people's behavior around him, I do think it can be kind of explained as control. Following his environment.
Okay. So a couple other questions. For you said that you also thought it could be automatic and that he's escaping aversive feelings. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And again, I'm just asking because I'm trying to get to the conceptualization of that you have for the case around these problem behaviors.
Yeah, and that's just a hypothesis that, you know, perhaps whatever antecedent is happening, you know, creates an aversive feeling in him, and then screaming or having a tantrum may release him from that aversive situation. So it could be automatic in that sense, but of course he's not going to be having aversive feelings or aversive situations when he's alone in a room. So that's not probably what it is.
Okay. And then my last two related questions about the NCR procedure. So part one of the question is, I think in the plan indicated that you're delivering the calming strategies, I think breaks or calming strategies as part of the NCR, right? And so that presumes that those calming strategies are indeed reinforcing for the client. Do we know that to be true? And then the second part of that is for the schedule related to that, right? I think it's, I can't recall, every 20 to 30 minutes. How did you set the schedule for access to the reinforcer that you're delivering non-contingently?
So we looked at behavior rates throughout the school day and throughout the day at home, and then also with consideration of, you know, the school schedule and the teacher's needs. That's how we set the schedule. Okay. No, I don't know that the calming strategies are reinforcing to him. I don't think they are. It's something that the school insisted on.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you so much for answering my questions. It helps me
I love your questions.
a lot.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And Vanessa, I had a couple as well. This is Joy again. And one of my questions was, you had mentioned that the parents aren't comfortable with a functional analysis. And I'm also noting that this FBA was completed in 2014. And so I'm wondering if they are uncomfortable with another FBA in addition to, or only uncomfortable with the functional analysis.
It was the functional analysis. They're afraid because we were going to do it over Christmas break, and he started doing a little bit better. So the family was just like, no, they backed out. They're like, what if he starts up again, basically because of this assessment, and it actually, you know, what if we already know all the information and they agree with my assessment of the function, and so they don't want to do it right now because they feel like he's on a little bit of an upswing. So
Sure. Well,
but an FBA, I think they would agree to. They would just have to request it from the district.
Okay, perfect. Well, and that's, you know, that's understandable from the parent perspective. I can understand when they have had the fluctuations, why they would be hesitant, and why it would be reinforcing not to do it on their end as well. It's funny because I have probably like 20 questions and most of our other panelists have asked them, and so it's great that we have that. One of the things that you had mentioned was the control extinction that's implemented. And I was wondering, when did you write that into the behavior plan specifically?
So that was in preschool. And then when we started the school year, it got really messy because the teacher was just getting involved a lot and not letting us implement it consistently. So it was in November where you see a dip in a lot of his behaviors, where we re-implemented it very consistently at home and as much as possible at school. But that was also when we started the little stamp chart. So both of those happened simultaneously. In November.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And the reason why I was asking was just related to your question too, and whether that was an extinction procedure or potentially a punishment procedure. And I thought that'd be great for us to be able to go and look back at the data that you have so much of, and we really appreciate that. We are running out of time, so I'm going to try to get a couple more questions in. As far as antecedent procedures, what choice opportunities does he currently have built in to his day at this time?
Anything and everything possible. So basically I just told the team just to flood him with as many choices as they possibly can. So, you know, do you want to walk that way or that way when you go on your break? Or do you want to, you know, do you want to hold your lunch pail, or do you want me to hold it? You know, sorry. Just basically.
I'm good. I'm actually tied up on a conference call on my online. Can I give you a call back? Okay.
Okay. So basically anything and every opportunity they possibly can to provide them with choices, that they are. So, you know, throughout the school day, it's impossible to say, you know, this many choices or these specific things. It's just he should have control whenever appropriate.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And for the replacement behaviors that you have implemented with this plan, have you observed generalization across from home into school, or do you see that he's demonstrating those replacement behaviors in one of those environments more consistently?
We're not seeing any generalization from some of our teaching of sportsmanship at home to school yet, but that's okay. I think we just kind of started formally targeting that, I think, in November. So, but we are seeing some generalization. So we have a video, we purchased a video model for some sportsman-like behavior and some, tolerating undesired outcomes. And we have seen him independently use some of the phrases that he sees on those videos without any sort of specific teaching there. So generalization is possible. We're not quite seeing it from home to school in every area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, we have about almost 20 minutes for recommendations, so I will go ahead and end right there so we can see what suggestions and recommendations we can provide. And we'll start first with our audience participants. So you can feel free to unmute yourself and provide a recommendation, or you can also chat it into the chat box as well. And we will include those within the written recommendations that we provide at the end to everybody. So does anybody in the participant group have a recommendation or a suggestion or a thought that they would like to just bring up to the group? Well, Vanessa, you've stumped everybody.
Well, I think, Vanessa, just in line with the questions I asked earlier, around flexibility, I know you had listed Superflex as a curriculum you used. I know Superflex, I believe it's Superflex, they have flexible thinking and some activities around flexible thinking. So if you haven't done those yet, they can be enjoyable activities, but they also target the way of thinking. I think one of the activities, I keep doing this with my hand because one of the activities is a rubber band. And you do something with rubber bands. So I don't know if you've looked at that. And then I've had some success giving a client like a list of common triggers that stress them out, along with like a thermometer, one of those feeling thermometers, and then just having them rate the color that it would make them potentially feel. And then after that, like you said, it might evoke issues, but just targeting maybe future issues, because I feel like it's got to feel really reactive to find new triggers. The word don't, the word no, the word can't, it just keeps changing. So that was my idea, just write up a list of conjunctions that are negative in nature and have him rank them and talk about how to respond. But
That's
I'm
a
sure
great idea.
more advice. So good luck.
Thank you.
That's excellent, Sarah. We will make sure that we definitely include that. And then we also have a specific assessment tool that we can recommend that goes along exactly with what you were saying. I just cannot think of it off the top of my head right now. But we'll include that in the written recommendations. And because we are running low on time, we're going to go ahead and move on. Sarah Baca, would you like to provide any recommendations that you have for Vanessa? And Sarah Baca is our parent panelist as well, just to remind everybody of who's joining us. Oh, and I think we need to unmute.
No?
Okay, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Joy. Zoe always does a great job of reintroducing herself. So Sarah Baca, and I am a parent of an 8-year-old child with autism. And I guess I just, the recommendation about the sleep and really making sure that isn't affecting anything. And then, I don't know, like increasing motivators, maybe find something else, find other things that can motivate him during the school day, or even, at the end of the week. And that would be all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. And Kristen Soul?
Hey there. So I'll introduce myself to you. Kristen Soul, pediatrician, autism specialist, Missouri. So I got to thinking, and thinking about patients that I have that are a lot like this little guy. And I kind of wonder how much anxiety is playing into some of this. And so I started thinking about this because of Sarah, both Sarah Baca and Sarah Broomclick. Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm. Brunswick.
All right. And then even Tina too, kind of thinking through some of the stuff that you've done. I think it's awesome. I really, really cannot tell you how lucky this little guy is to have you working with him this hard. However, there's a part of me that wonders, and as I think about it, are some of his reactions and his rigidity really more rooted in core anxiety that might be helped with something like CBT, so cognitive behavior therapy, as an additive to what you're doing already? Do you know, sorry, I know I should have asked my clarifying questions earlier, but do you know if he's doing any kind of CBT?
He's not.
Okay. So I really think that given his verbal skills, and this is kind of how I try to decide whether, CBT, so cognitive behavior therapy, or something like that would be helpful. So he's got really good cognitive or really good verbal skills. Seems like he's got pretty darn good cognitive skills. And actually there's a lot of evidence that suggests that CBT, again, cognitive behavior therapy, works really nicely in kids with autism. There are a few minor tweaks that you have to do to kind of get it to fit better, but I think he could respond to that well. Obviously I'm a medical doctor, so I prescribe medicines along with lots of other things. So not saying he needs to have a medicine, but certainly if the behavior modifications and the potentially trying to do some counseling don't cut it, I've seen some really nice improvements with kids after those things have been tried. I've seen some really nice improvements with some very low dose SSRIs or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day, but those are just things to think about. And the reason why I suggested the CBT and kind of thinking about it from a root of anxiety is that some of the kids that I've worked with, as we winnow down their anxiety, a lot of this rigidity, all of this stuff gets way, way better. And so you might see him having more progress in other areas if the anxiety is managed. So I don't know what you feel like. I don't know if you think he has anxiety, but in listening to what you've said, it makes me wonder if there's a root cause of worry and control and that kind of thing.
I think that's a fair assessment. And I've seen some anxiety-like symptoms with him, having a tantrum because he thought something was going to happen. Yeah. Happens quite often. So,
yeah. So just some things to think about, but I would certainly try a combination of what you're doing plus CBT, and then consider if that's still not quite he's not still learning the coping strategies or whatever, then having a conversation either again with us or having the family talk to their pediatrician. Okay. You may not feel comfortable with it, which is why you might have to come back to us, but we can certainly kind of work through some of that too.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that perspective, Kristen. I appreciate it.
No problem.
And Zoe, our LASW.
Let's see. So I am going to really second what Dr. Soul said, which is that I think two pieces that I can think of is one of the reasons why I was talking about the reinforcement and are there things that he feels good about is I'm not real clear about, again, sort of the function of this behavior and what's going on with him. And it sounds like, his parents aren't real clear on what's going on with him, even though he has a diagnosis of autism. His teacher, there seems to be some real lack of agreement in terms of the ABA team and the teacher and what are the proper approaches. And, and again, I keep coming back to this, like, what's going on with this kiddo? Like what's happening for him that he is so reactive and kind of all over the place, right? You put in a strategy, it kind of works for a while, and it doesn't work. And so I'm wondering two things, or I guess I have two recommendations. One is to maybe take a big step back with both the parents and the school staff to kind of talk about what ABA is, why we do a functional assessment in terms of that it really is a gathering of information so that we can really understand him. Maybe going back to what are the things that you can agree on, right? So like it sounds like the sticker piece with the teacher is thumbs up, right? She's doing it. It's a place that you guys can agree. And I think that gathering some more information and finding those areas where there is agreement might give a good sort of place to start. I wonder for him if he kind of feels all over the map too, right? It's like, they don't really, and this is the, and so it just feels like there's a lot going on that maybe trying to focus and simplify for everybody might be helpful. And again, that was a very broad recommendation. I hope did that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think what you're saying is to maybe sit down with some of the key players and not try to like come up with a specific thing to do or a specific intervention, but really just pulling back and talking about what we can do as an ABA provider and what that means for him.
And as a team, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that you can put together as a team to support him? I mean, I don't know about you, but first of all, I have to say you are so brave to come and present this and have everything picked apart. Really easy to, what is it called, Monday morning quarterback, right? So I so applaud you for just being brave and coming on and allowing all of us to learn through this process. So one of the reasons why I thought about coming back to team was when Dr. Soul said recommended medication or cognitive behavioral therapy. I thought, wow, that would be a really hard thing maybe to bring up with a family who were not necessarily in agreement in terms of what's going on. But those are things that might come up with in a team context. And so it's a really kind of easy, non-pressure way to kind of problem solve and maybe get people to where they need to be of their own fruition, right? To have them come up with the idea. But anyway, that's sort of my general recommendation. I hope that helps.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. And we have Tina.
Hi again. I think all the recommendations people have given have been really great so far, and I also concur with the CBT recommendation. It's probably no surprise given the questions that I asked about anxiety and depression. And I think the other probably suggestion I have that's no surprise is around sort of continued assessment techniques. And so I do think that, as Joy I think was alluding to earlier, trying to get back to doing another FBA, even if you can't get an experimental functional analysis done, repeating the FBA, if it's not done in the context of the school, since the problem behavior does occur at home and you're working with him in that context, certainly something that it sounds like you could do. And I think just doing another assessment, even if you feel really good about the functions, that you know what they are, might help you refine your thinking a little bit. So I would do that. That would be my recommendation. I do think the question you asked about that control extinction procedure, I don't think you've got extinction going on with that procedure, and I think you already know that, I think, from the way you brought it up. I think you kind of already answered your question there. And I think in part because of the way the procedure is structured, it's not working as extinction, but I think also, again, that link between what you've identified as potentially the reinforcer in the moment where you're implementing that control extinction procedure is a little off. And so honing in on the function to get at the specifics will refine your control extinction procedure. Mm-hmm. Also, because of the question I asked earlier, probably no surprise, I would consider reworking your NCR component. I think NCR is a great technique, and I loved that you've included it in your protocol. Mm-hmm. I think making sure that, again, the reinforcer you're delivering in your NCR is actually a good, powerful reinforcer, and that you've got nice linkage between the identification of that reinforcer in your NCR and what you've identified through your FBA is going to be key. I love that you've created a thoughtful schedule for delivery of that reinforcer, but the NCR procedure doesn't seem to be effective for some reason. It may be just that the reinforcer isn't right, and or it may be that the schedule is a little off. And so just consider both. I'm assuming it's probably more the former than the latter, but don't forget about the latter. Okay. And then in conjunction with the CBD piece, I think even sort of independent of whether you seek out additional services with a kiddo from a psychologist who delivers CBT, I think that there's a lot of really cool behavior analytic work that you can do around self-monitoring strategies, as other people have alluded to. Mm-hmm. And I concur wholeheartedly. This kid's got a lot of great skills, and his language and cognitive skills could really support some nice self-monitoring. So some of these other things that you think are going on or really going on, his ability to self-monitor may function nicely for him. So I know I hit those things quickly, but I want to give Joy a few minutes and we're running short on time. But you're doing a great job and you've done a lot of great critical thinking about the case so far. So kudos.
Thank you.
Yes, and I did talk to Vanessa before this case, and I told her this is a complex case, and this is actually where we have a lot of our BCBAs come in, and they have challenging cases where the child is, they're smart, they're intelligent children, and they implement intervention, and it is effective for a period of time, and they find that they are struggling with similar issues, and that's partly why I wanted her to come and present, because part of the feedback we've received from the group is, it's really nice to know I'm not the only one that's going through this. It's really nice to know I'm not the only one that's encountering this. And I thought it would be a great opportunity for our other behavior, and I see people nodding their heads, our other behavior analysts to be able to encounter this case as well. So one of the things that Tina had mentioned that I was also thinking as well was the self-monitoring piece might be really nice for him because of that component that you had mentioned you had added in with the teacher where she's giving him those stamps based on different points of the day, and I think that it was 5, he had to earn 4, but there were 5 stamps or stickers that he could earn throughout the school day. So in looking at that, if he were to be able to self-monitor maybe even a little bit more frequently throughout the school day and put in some of those rule-governed behavior that you are teaching him already, that you already have as replacement behavior, I think that would be something that he would probably be successful with. And I've seen some other kiddos really, even when they're self-monitoring as often as every 15 minutes, been quite successful with that and then building that back up. So that might be something to consider. I remembered what it was because thanks to my iPhone, but I was thinking specifically of a 5 will make me lose control, using that as a potential assessment where they'll go through different scenarios and then you can rate on a scale of 1 to 5 how aversive that might be, and it's specifically for children with anxiety as well. And so that might be something to think about in terms of identifying a list in sequence of what might be more aversive and less aversive, and then starting off with those things that are a little less aversive, and then building out practice opportunities outside of when they naturally occur throughout the day. So with the control extinction, I see what you are, what you're moving towards with that intervention. And so maybe what it is not necessarily when it occurs naturally, but contriving an opportunity, even telling them, okay, we're going to practice. This is what we're going to practice, and then choosing one of those scenarios that are not as aversive and hopefully setting him up for success, and then evaluating some of those reinforcers that we're using as well. The other thing too that I think was mentioned was potentially looking at, in addition to the sleep, but maybe just a daily log, if there's some other just setting events. I think Sarah Baca had a really nice point where sometimes parents don't think about it or realize like, oh yeah, this is going well, and they don't maybe realize that there might be some other contributing factors, so they might not be reporting them to you. And so that might be something that would be worthwhile to not only do a sleep log, but more of a daily log to determine, is there something that maybe we just haven't thought of that might be occurring related to his sleeping, his health, or his eating, and whether there might be just some setting events too. But it's hard to tell because the data, when we were looking at them, are across time, a large period of time. So I don't know how much of that is fluctuating on a weekly basis versus just, the concerns that we've had over a longer period of time.